Good evening. This is Thursday, April 10th, 208 days until the 2008 presidential election. After 5 years and 1 month, President George Bush today finally made clear his plan for our troops in Iraq. His is the discount department store of presidencies. Buy your wholesale low, mark it up to ridiculous levels of profit, then one night silently increase every price in the store by 1/3. Later, drop those prices by a lesser amount and then dramatically and proudly scream from the rooftops that you are holding a 25% off sale. Our fifth story in the countdown. Last year, he escalated the war in Iraq. Today, he announced there would be no de-escalation beyond July, yet somehow stood there with a straight face and lied about how he was withdrawing troops. Now, that was hardly the lone instance of dissembling, tortured logic, sophistry, and outright dishonesty in Mr. Bush's latest sugarcoating of the undeniable and unforgivable fact that he is continuing to arrange for the needless deaths of American heroes. We will now fact-check Mr. Bush, as if the word fact and the name Bush belong anywhere near each other.
General Petraeus has reported that security conditions have improved enough to withdraw all 5 surge brigades by the end of July. That means that by July 31st, the number of U.S. combat brigades in Iraq will be down by 25% from last year.
The number of U.S. combat brigades in Iraq will drop to 15 from its peak of 20 last year. But at the start of last year, at the start of Mr. Bush's escalation, it was, of course, 15. Combat brigades aside, the number of U.S. troops in Iraq, the Pentagon said in February, will actually be higher than it was. Not the 132,000 of January 2007, but 140,000. And the point of sending those 5 brigades was not, we were told, to reduce violence enough that they could leave, but enough that other brigades could leave, a decision General Petraeus has now said cannot be made any earlier than September. Mr. Bush today saying he accepts that recommendation.
General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker have submitted recommendations on the way forward. After detailed discussions with my national security team, including the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Joint Chiefs of Staff, I've accepted these recommendations.
That claim that his decision followed General Petraeus' recommendation, we know today to be a lie. Mr. Bush himself previewing his speech for friendly interviewer William Kristol yesterday, saying he would address whether more than 5 brigades could come home. Quote, "My answer is no. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that I agree with David." Nor is this the only matter on which President Bush yesterday refutes President Bush today. Bush today claiming that Iraq's government supports the path he laid out today.
Those who say that the way to encourage further progress is to back off and force the Iraqis to fend for themselves are simply wrong. The Iraqis are a proud people who understand the enormity of the challenges they face and are anxious to meet them. But they know that they still need our help until they can stand by themselves.
The Associated Press today reporting that Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki disagrees with waiting until September to start considering American drawdowns, and that Mr. Maliki told Mr. Bush that during a phone call yesterday, possibly recalling Mr. Bush's promise of last year.
We are there at the invitation of the Iraqi government. This is a sovereign nation. 12 million people went to the polls to approve a constitution. It's their government's choice. If they were to say leave, we would leave.
If not at Maliki's urging, then when can the troops come home? Perhaps Mr. Bush literally meant if all 12 million Iraqi voters asked unanimously. In a war of shifting rationales, a milestone today as Mr. Bush, in just 15 minutes, escalated yet again his own definition of the victory that must be won by U.S. troops who long ago defeated the supposed threat to our safety. First, the 11:28 a.m. EDT definition of Bushian victory.
All our efforts are aimed at a clear goal, a free Iraq that can protect its people, support itself economically, and take charge of its own political affairs.
But before our troops could set their sights on that target, in the final moments of his own speech, Mr. Bush raised the bar to unimaginable heights. Bushian victory, the 11:41 a.m. EDT edition.
The day will come when Iraq is a stable democracy that helps fight our common enemies and promote our common interests in the Middle East. And when that day arrives, you'll come home with pride in your success and the gratitude of your whole nation.
The troops can come home when Iraq is willing to fight our, quote, common enemies, defined just minutes before as al-Qaeda And Iran, the fellow Shiites next door, now Iraq's ally thanks to Mr. Bush's war, which ended decades of Iraq and Iran keeping each other in check. And on that stable democracy criterion, this report from Mr. Bush.
Progress in the provinces is leading to progress in Baghdad. As Iraqi leaders increasingly act together, they share power, and they forge compromises on behalf of the nation. Upcoming elections will consolidate this progress.
Maliki's cabinet actually has fewer parties, fewer factions now than before the escalation. One party purged in this way, that of the radical cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, favored to do well in those October elections, Mr. Bush said will consolidate progress. And the Americans in Iraq?
Our work in Iraq will still demand sacrifices from our whole nation, especially our military, for some time to come. To ease the burden on our troops and their families, I have directed the Secretary of Defense to reduce deployment lengths from 15 months to 12 months for all active Army soldiers deploying to the Central Command Area of Operations. These changes will be effective for those deploying after August 1st. We'll also ensure that our Army units will have at least a year home for every year in the field.
Note first that awful caveat. The 20% reduction in length of tour will apply to no American soldier in Iraq today. But this 1 year fighting, 1 year home, that a Democratic proposal defeated last year by Republicans. John McCain said it would do more harm than good. Army Vice Chief of Staff General Richard Cody saying just last week in testimony, quote, where we need to be with this force is no more than 12 months on the ground and 24 months back. The reason? The well-being of individual soldiers, their families, and the military itself. Concerns Mr. Bush brushed off today.
The stress on our force is real, but the Joint Chiefs have assured me that our all-volunteer force is strong and resilient enough to fight and win this war on terror. The trends in Iraq are positive. Our troops want to win. Recruiting and retention have remained strong during the surge. And I believe this. I believe the surest way to depress morale and weaken the force would be to lose in Iraq.
Perhaps Mr. Bush's worst fantasy, that nothing could depress troop morale more than failing to meet his goals in Iraq. It is rendered obscenely transparent by the worst possible metric of morale. The Associated Press reporting today that U.S. troops are committing suicide at record levels. For 121 of them last year alone, this war is already over.